Hello, I'm Brady Steyer, and I have a question for you. Have you ever or currently owned an iPhone? If you answered yes to that question, well, I'm sorry to inform you, but there's a high possibility that your phone is a byproduct of the labor violations that are in China. In this short but informational video, I will provide you with a couple different sort of subtopics within this topic, explain why they're an issue, and then I will talk about my sort of belief as to what we should take towards this issue and what other nations' approaches have been to take towards this issue, and then we will finally wrap it up with some of my final thoughts on this. In Xinjiang, the government is the trafficker. Authorities use threats of physical violence, forcible drug intake, physical and sexual abuse, and torture to force detainees to work in adjacent or off-site factories or work sites, producing garments, footwear, carpets, yarn, and food products, etc. And these goods are then finding their ways into our businesses and homes in the U.S. So Xinjiang is a region in China where labor violations are most prevalent. They get their quote-unquote workers in a variety of ways, as shown in this quote. These methods of getting their workers are horrendous and should be stopped immediately. Arguably, what I find to be the worst byproduct of this is the items that actually find their ways inside of our own households when we use them on a daily basis. This then supports my reasoning as to why this is a problem and why it should be combated. PRC officials then defended the facilities as necessary measures to counter terrorism, while also complaining that many of them had been closed. In reality, they had grown in number and in size, with hundreds of thousands of victims graduating and being sent to larger and more technological advanced prisons under false terrorism-related charges. So the PRC, the People Republic of China, addressed the issue as these facilities were in actuality internment camps. This falsely stated that these facilities were being, they also falsely stated that these facilities were being closed, and the entire goal of these facilities were to combat terrorism, but in reality, the numbers of facilities were growing, and the citizens were being falsely charged with being terrorists and being sent to these facilities. This then supports my claim as to why this is a problem, because the PRC is supposed to be the representative for the people of the nation. So when they exploit the citizens for their own gain, who will support the citizens of this nation who are suffering? Apple, like Samsung and other several multinational companies, has previously faced scrutiny over the working conditions at the factories in China where its products are made. But the allegations in the latest report suggest that the company might need to increase its vigilance over 200 major global suppliers that account for 97% of Apple's component costs. So in recent reports suggest that the labor violations have once again resurfaced in Apple's facilities in China. This reoccurring issue of these horrible work conditions that have left permanent mental health and physical scars to these workers is my reasoning as to why I believe this is an issue. If this problem has happened previously, it really goes to show how much of attentiveness and care is really shown towards this matter. Furthermore, supporting my idea of why something should happen towards this issue. In a statement on Thursday, Apple said, Thursday being in the article of the time, said the most recent annual audit of the Shaoqing plant in May had found some concrete areas for improvement in Catcher's operations, and we worked with Catcher to develop a corrective action plan. When Apple addressed the issue of the current labor violations in their facilities in China, they responded to the matter in a very nonchalant way. It's not just areas for improvement. People are dying over this. Families are falling. And this is another reason of many as to why I believe this is a problem. A Chinese government spokesman in state media dismissed talk of forced labor as a smear by Westerners bent on keeping China down. An official spokesman of China spoke on these claims of forced labor in the nation. He simply responded to the matter by pointing the finger at the U.S. and saying that we're trying to keep China down. And I think it's absolutely absurd and almost comical to think that you could try to sweep an issue as big as this under the carpet and try to blame it on something like a rivalry between the U.S. and China. With little to no recognition of this issue on a large scale within the nation, this supports my idea of why I believe this is a problem. So now that I've given you a bit of context to actually what this issue is, I'm going to go ahead and explain why it's a problem. With so many disappeared into and abused within the system, entire communities in Xinjiang, communities with rich histories and immeasurable cultural significance, have become ghost towns. Entire communities are fading away due to the horrible work conditions and other labor violations present in China. This is a horrible thing to even think about. I can't even fathom that statement. So just to take a moment to think, if your entire neighborhood disappeared, that would probably be the comparison between the two. So this statement by itself is a reason why I believe this is a problem. The employees are made to work excessive overtime and handle toxic chemicals without proper protective clothing. According to a report released Thursday by Green America, an environmental nonprofit group in China Labor Watch, a workers' rights group based in New York. Can you even imagine how horrible these work conditions are? What they can do to a person? Just imagine you're exhausted from working overtime the previous night and now you're handling dangerous chemicals without proper protective gear. I can tell you right now, I'd be constantly working in fear, which is not good for anyone. So with this disturbing statement about how unfair these work conditions are and how prevalent they are in China, this further supports my issue as to why this is an actual issue. An undercover investigation by Labor Watch at Shakin plant last month found that the fire exits were locked and that the flammable aluminum magnesium alloy dust and shavings filled the air and littered the floors of some workshops. Investigators also found that employees were forced to work as many as 100 hours of overtime a month and failed to receive the social insurance payments required under Chinese law, according to a report. It said that the plant made aluminum covers for a coming iPad and parts for the iPhone 5. Once again, hearing these disturbing truths about these unsafe work conditions that accumulate many deaths every year is depressing, and to think in a factory that produces the very thing I'm using to type this document is saddening. With these grim facts in mind, this further expands my reasoning as to why this is an issue and why it needs to be resolved. Across Xinjiang, over 1 million Uyghurs have passed through such camps in recent years. Officials eventually admitted to the camp's existence in 2018, pointing towards terrorist attacks by Muslims from Xinjiang. They say China had set up vocational training centers to cure minds infected with religious extremism. In October 2018, China's Central Division Television toured a camp in Hotan, an ancient oasis city. Detainees were shown in Mandarin language classes, studying Chinese laws, learning such skills as sewing before thanking authorities for saving them. In contrast, critics called the campaign both brutal in its methods and horrifyingly arbitrary in its application. Leaked government files record Uyghurs in turn for such suspicious acts of growing long beards, applying for passport, or using foreign messaging services like Skype. Ex-detainees have accused camp staff of beating and rapes. People in the region of Xinjiang are completely losing their identities to these facilities they get sent to. With this propaganda and such horrible means of torture, they completely lose who they were and get sent out into the real world a completely different person. With this happening and people suffering, I can't stand for it, which is exactly why I believe this is a problem and people should take a stand. To conclude this video, I'd just like to add some of my final thoughts that I found from after researching this topic. So let's just get this started. After researching, I found that Apple factories in China had labor violations present. What other companies stationed in China share the same problem? We didn't really get the opportunity to hear all that much about other companies, so I know that the big corporations like Nike and I'm sure Adidas, BMW, I think, and Volkswagen, I'm sure that they have that same issue as well. So I was just curious about any sort of news coverage or media coverage that they have on that. So I was just curious about that. Where I will find myself looking to research more into this topic is through the database provided by our library. They provide a variety of sources to look from, and they're very informative. A related issue I'd be interested in is looking at is the labor violations in other parts of the world. Anywhere really, nowhere specific. I would just like to see how my topic compares to other nations across the world, if they share a similar issue within labor violations or a very different issue, and then just compare the two. That concludes my video, so thank you for watching, and I hope you learned something. So now that I've actually provided you with the information as to why this is an issue, I would actually like to add some possible solutions towards this issue of my own, and then also some measures that other nations have taken into their hands to help combat this issue. So I believe this is a very complicated issue that is completely out of my comprehension and reach, but I enjoy the steps that the U.S. has taken to help reduce the amount of labor violations present. I believe if I had the ability to combat this issue, I would take the exact same approach. Many companies have taken a stand against the use of forced labor in China by cutting ties with the suppliers in Xinjiang or those connected to the PRC's campaign of repression, at times earning them heavy consumer and state-run media backlash within the Chinese domestic market. Companies across the nation in America have cut ties with suppliers in Xinjiang with the hopes of them losing a great portion of their power and helping fight the issue. I love this solution to this issue because it cuts them off right at the source. I shouldn't say a solution though, just because it's going to take a lot more to get rid of this issue, but it's definitely a good start. The international community has taken tough action to promote accountability for the PRC's actions and strengthen market defenses against the import of these goods. For example, the United States, the Department of State, the Treasury, Commerce, and Homeland Security released the Xinjiang Supply Chain Business Advisory to alert businesses and other entities to reputational, economic, and legal risks of the involvement with entities in or linked to Xinjiang. Withholding accountability for the PRC's actions, it definitely makes a statement. It calls them out and alerts other nations in the process, bringing more attention to this issue and ultimately leaving them with less power to their name. With this approach in mind, I think that we could band together as a group and begin to advance on this issue and get closer to a solution. I definitely think that this issue is beyond the help of the United States, and I think we've done a tremendous job at recognizing this issue and taking small steps to get the ball rolling on it. But we need help of other nations. We need the help of other nations. We can't do this alone. With enough support, patience, and perseverance, we can beat this. And just to finally conclude this, here's some final thoughts that I have and potential next steps that I have. Sorry about that. A little bit of technical difficulties. The root causes and downstream effects of labor abuse, which include poverty, migration patterns, ingrained economic practices, and weakened state authority, cannot be addressed with unilateral actions by trade partners. Resolving these issues requires legislative changes and strengthening of government and social institutions, collaboration between public and private sectors, entities, education, and incentives for business. Labor violations create everlasting scars in communities. Some of these scars are poverty, migrations of communities, ingrained economic practices, and weakened state authority. These everlasting effects can and do affect future generations of people. No one should have to live that type of lifestyle. It's no way to live. Labor abuse is responsible for the horrible lifestyles that are created for current and future generations. This statement is exactly why this supports my argument of why this is an issue.